Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to do the full review now of the new Tamron 15 to 30 millimeter f2.8 DI VC USD. So a quick breakdown of what some of that means. This lens is part of Tamron's Super Performance line, and the DI represents the fact that it's a full frame lens. And then we have VC, which stands for vibration compensation. It's a big deal, which we'll get to in just a moment. And then finally, USD is Tamron's ultrasonic drive. And it's Tamron's equivalent of Canon's USM drive. And so its design is to provide quick, fast focus. Now, this lens is, I've been really excited to review this lens ever since it was announced quite a few months ago. I was right in the process of doing the Canon 16 to 35 f4 LIS lens review when I heard about the new Tamron, and immediately it piqued my interest, and I had hoped at that time to be able to get my hands on the Tamron to directly compare them. But obviously the release of the Tamron was still about 5 months out at that point. And so I've been very fortunate to have this lens in my hands for the last week or so. It's a fairly quick review period because the lens is just starting to come to market and being passed on to other reviewers after I'm done with it. But I've been really excited to have one of the early copies of this lens in my hands, and I have to say that over the process of this review period, this lens has not only met my expectations, and I was pretty excited about it, but it has surpassed those expectations. Now, right off the top, let me just get a few things out of the way. There are two major drawbacks to this lens, and number one is the fact that because of a bulbous front element, as you can see, it means that the use of traditional filters is precluded. And so if you're going to use filters with this, it will require using an aftermarket system, which doesn't exist at the moment, but I fully expect it to over the process of a few months down the road, and using large square filters. It's not necessarily a terrible deal. I've had the same kind of system for other lenses before. The advantage of those is that if you're going to be using graduated ND filters, which are, to me, a graduated ND filter is a landscape photographer is one of their best friends. And so using a grad ND filter is going to require pretty much using a square filter anyway. And so that is a significant drawback for many of you that like the ease of using traditional screw-on filters, and so it means no circular polarizer here. And so anyway, that is number one drawback. Number two is the fact that, as you can see, this is a very large lens. And so just to give you kind of a visual comparison, here is Tamron's 24 to 70 f2.8 lens, and so just a kind of a quick visual comparison between those. You can see that this new lens, number one, it's a bit longer, and of course it has a fixed lens hood, and so unlike the 24 to 70, which has a traditional detachable lens hood, the one on the 15 to 30 is fixed in place, and so that extra length is going to always be there. And then it fits between that, and then I've got Tamron's 70 to 200 f2.8 zoom. And so you can see obviously two very different designs, but in terms of the actual thickness, this lens is the squattest product pretty much that comes from Tamron outside of one of the large super telephoto lenses. And so it is a large lens, and in fact it weighs in at about 1,100 grams. That puts it at roughly 450 plus grams heavier than the new Canon 16 to 35 f4L, and even Nikon's Nikkor 14 to 24 f2.8G lens comes in at about 1,000 grams. And so it is basically in its class now, it is the largest and heaviest of the wide-angle zoom lenses that are available. The body is still engineered plastics, but it seems to be built, I would say the build quality is actually a hair higher than other Tamron lenses that I've used. It seems to have a very robust build. It does claim a moisture resistance. It has a gasket to seal at the lens mount. And then also there are special coatings that are on, including a flooring coating on this bulbous front element that is designed to help it to shed water and to resist the various elements that it's going to be exposed to. During my review period, I have faced some really lousy weather during this time. And so I have had this lens out shooting. I shot a sunrise series that you'll see some pictures of in this, and also that I've written an article about. And I shot that in with the wind chill. It was right at about, it was minus 38, right around minus 40. And so that's very, very cold temperatures, cold enough that there was frost building up on my tripod when I got back. But the lens continued to perform perfectly. I had no issues with autofocus, no hesitation with the electronics. And so I think that's a good start to speaking about the robustness of this particular lens. So this is not necessarily what you would call a true internally zooming lens. Now, it never exceeds the actual dimensions of the fixed lens hood, but at the widest position, you will find that is the position where the front elements are the furthest forward. And there's an internal kind of lens hood and protector that corresponds with the outer lip, and at this stage, they are about roughly equal. Now, if you go towards the furthest zoom position, which would be 30 millimeters, it actually recesses and the front element is the furthest away from the front. The focus here is very quick. It is very accurate. I've had no issues at all. And so another job well done there by Tamron. And I don't think that with a lens like this, you're ever going to be really held back at all by the autofocus. It performs very well. And so your top switch here on the barrel, there's only two switches. Top switch is just to select between autofocus and manual focus. By the way, even if you're in autofocus, absolutely you can override manually at any point. No issue with that. The USD drive allows for that. The second switch on there, of course, is what sets this lens apart. Canon, of course, introduced a image-stabilized wide-angle zoom lens in the 16 to 35 f4 LIS lens, which is an awesome lens, by the way. This Tamron, it kind of steals the show by taking that and then basically also adding the design and wider focal length of the Nikkor 14 to 24 f2.8G lens. And so it's got the wide aperture of an f2.8, and it's more similar in build design, I would say, to the Nikkor. But at the same time, it adds on the VC, or the vibration compensation, an image stabilizer, which works very well. And Tamron has done a great job since it's introduced the VC systems. They work just remarkably well. And I've been able to handhold some pretty cool images at a full second, and even at over a second in length, 2 seconds. And you know, with good technique, you can nail those kinds of shots. So, you know, there are certainly applications. Some question the validity or the need for an image stabilizer on such a wide focal length. But you'll certainly find that there are applications, and let's say a more typical shutter speed, even of 1/10 or 1/15 of a second, you're not going to have any problem hand-holding shots like that, as long as you, of course, as long as you have a stationary target. But that means that, say, shooting the landscape or shooting an interior when you don't have a lot of existing light and you want to try to keep the ISO down to get a cleaner final image, it's going to enable you to do that even if you don't have a tripod. Some of you will bring a tripod along for the majority of your shooting. I am the opposite. I use a tripod as rarely as possible, and I do the majority of my shooting, even a lot of, if I'm even bracketing exposures, I most often do it handheld because I don't carry a tripod with me very often. And I like to go out into the field, out into the woods, and I don't want to pack along a tripod. And so as a result, VC is something that is great for me. And then, of course, if you are planning on shooting video, VC or having an image stabilizer is really huge. And this is going to be a fabulous, fabulous lens for wedding or event photographers because it's got great sharpness, wide open. And in fact, if you want to take a closer look at that sharpness, I've got another comparison video where I really examine the image quality and I look comparing it to the Rokinon 14mm f2.8, which is a remarkably sharp prime, along with this Tamron. I wish I had, at the time of this review, a copy of the Canon 16 to 35 on hand. I don't have that at the moment, but I did spend about 6 weeks with it 4 or 5 months ago, and so I have a pretty good sense of its performance. And I would say that comparing those, and of course I'm not comparing them side by side, so it's not a scientific comparison, but from my familiarity with that lens and with this new lens, I think you're going to find that this has basically the same image quality at f2.8 or close to it than what the Canon does at f4. This lens has amazing micro contrast. I've talked about how big this lens is. It's considerably bigger than the 16 to 35, and so if that's if that's an issue for you, then probably the Canon 16 to 35 is more your bet. However, this lens, it really kind of reminds me, I had the privilege of reviewing a Zeiss Otis 85mm lens a few months ago, and of course it's a massive lens, larger still than this, heavier. But the approach that Zeiss took with that is they told their engineers, essentially, we don't care how big it is or how much it cost. We just simply want to make the best lens possible. And that lens was a revelation. Yeah, it was big, and yeah, it's expensive, but it was mind-blowingly good. And the contrast that came out of that, even wide open, was amazing. Obviously, this lens is not quite at that optical pinnacle, but I have felt a lot of similarities as I've closely examined images, and that I feel that Tamron did pretty much the same thing, with the exception of saying cost being no option, because Tamron's not in the same place as Zeiss is when it comes to that. But it's as if they told their engineers, we don't care how big it is or how heavy it is, just make it fantastic. And that's exactly what Tamron's engineers did. This lens actually is able to out-resolve the Rokinon 14mm f2.8, which is considered to be a very sharp lens. It is able to out-resolve it wide open. It definitely blows this away wide open. And I would say, comparing it to the 16 to 35, that the Canon has no real advantage at all. And that is right out into the corners. And of course, that's wide open at f2.8. And as you stop it down, you know it's a good lens because the depth of field increases, and some of your texture resolution may increase marginally, but this lens is already sharp wide open, and it just improves very slightly as you stop it down. But really, it's more about, just as with the Canon, you stop it down for depth of field, not because you need additional sharpness. It's very, very sharp wide open, and the micro contrast is really exceptional with this lens. It beats any wide angle option that I've looked at so far in terms of the micro contrast. I am very, very impressed with the optical performance from this lens. And so at the end of the day, I'm excited enough about this lens that I'm already making the plans to add it to my own personal kit. This is a review copy that I have. It's not mine, but I am planning to add this to my bag. And already I also reviewed the Canon 100 to 400mm Mark II zoom lens telephoto, and I certainly have plans to add that to my own kit as well. Both of these lenses are really exceptional, and it's been a great start. 2015 has brought me some amazing lenses, and I'm really excited about this. You'll find that there are far more image samples that will be included in my full written review on this, and also I've done a few other articles that really get in close and analyze image quality. Chromatic aberrations are not non-existent. If you look very close at a pixel level, you will find a few places where there is a bit of green fringing and then a little bit of purple fringing, but it's super well controlled. It's only going to be, and that's without any kind of correction at all. It's going to be very easy to correct in software, and it's only visible if you are looking at kind of, pixel peeping. And so that's a great performance. Also, its flare resistance is almost perfect. I was only able to produce in the most bright conditions. I was only able to produce just a little tiny controlled ghosting or flare pattern from it, but it doesn't lose contrast. The image quality holds up exceptionally well. That's really important when you're shooting with a wide-angle lens, particularly one that doesn't take traditional filters, is it means you're going to be able to produce a great result in basically any kind of lighting condition. And so that is awesome. One other thing to note, which is kind of unusual for a lens that goes all the way to 15 millimeters, which means that it has quite a wide angle of view, about 110 degrees. Despite that, it is doing a great job of controlling distortion. Obviously, with a wide-angle lens, depending on how you hold the sensor relative to your subject, you can produce distortion, which is perspective distortion. But in terms of actual lens or barrel distortion, this lens is doing an exceptional job. And so as a result, like the Canon 16-35, it certainly would work for those that are looking to shoot architectural work with it, because it does a great job of controlling distortion. Optically, there's nothing that I can criticize. I have been floored when I actually get it and compare this lens to others. I've been floored by how awesome it is. Tamron did a great job with this. And here is perhaps the best news of all. Tamron has managed to do this while charging a very reasonable price for it. The introductory retail price in the US is $11.99 for this lens. That puts it right at par with the Canon 16-35, which when it came out, that's 16-35 f4 LIS. When that lens came out, we all remarked that it was very reasonably priced for its performance. Of course, this is an f2.8 lens, and so price-wise, it would be in a whole nother strata. For example, Nikor's 14-24 millimeter runs right around $2,000 US. And so that means that this lens is roughly 60% the cost of the Nikkor, and it adds the killer app of an image stabilizer. And there's been a great review that's been done by Matt Granger comparing this lens. I don't shoot Nikon, but he compared it to the 14-24, and although he loves his Nikkor products, his conclusion was that this lens may even be better than the mighty Nikkor 14-24 f2.8G lens. And so that's a pretty stellar achievement, because that has been kind of the gold standard for wide-angle zoom lenses. And so, as you can tell, I'm very impressed with this lens. I think that Tamron has done a fantastic job. Great build, great optics, a great design. It's big, yes, and it doesn't use traditional filters, but if those are not deal breakers for you, you need to pre-order a copy of this lens and get your hands on it. It truly is exceptional. Hope you've enjoyed this review, and you might want to look at some of the other parts to break down other things in more detail. But thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and a lot more great reviews will be coming your way shortly. Have a great day. Thanks.